It's not that the technique didn't work. It's not that the visualization wasn't vivid enough or the affirmations weren't said often enough. The truth is much deeper, and for a long time, it was hidden behind words that were either misunderstood or taught by people who never actually applied the core of what Neville Goddard was saying. Because this isn't about working harder or thinking more positively. It's about the fact that what feels like a contradiction, what seems backward or even illogical, is actually where the real power lies. For most people, manifestation starts from the idea of lack. Something is missing, so there's an attempt to change it. But that very starting point, the feeling of it's not here yet, is what keeps the thing out of reach. What most don't realize is that trying to get somewhere from the state of not having it will never work, no matter how much desire is involved, because the state of wanting can only create more experiences of wanting. That's the trap. And no one talks about that part because it's uncomfortable. It means letting go of the very mindset that the entire self-help world is built on, the mindset of fixing, chasing, and striving. Neville didn't teach effort. He taught selection. He said creation is finished, meaning everything that could ever be experienced already exists, and the only real work is shifting into the version of self that already has it. But here's where the paradox shows up. Because the mind wants to do something, fix something, act in a way that proves worthiness. Yet the law isn't about proving anything. It's about accepting. It's about assuming the state of the wish fulfilled and making that state more familiar than the story of not having. And that's hard when everything on the outside seems to reflect the old story. When someone doesn't respond, when money feels tight, when the body still hurts, the reflex is to try to change the condition, but the deeper truth is that the outer world is only a shadow. The real substance is the state of being, the identity, the inner conversations. And when those shift, the world has no choice but to follow. This is what almost no one talks about. Manifestation begins with surrender, not giving up, but letting go of the false self, the part that believes it has to fight, force, or earn, the part that thinks it's separate from what it wants. That's the lie that has to break. And the only thing that breaks it is moving beyond knowledge and into embodiment, not pretending something is true in the outer world, not acting like it's done, but feeling the relief, the peace, and the naturalness of already being the version of self for whom it's just normal. No question, no doubt, no waiting. So if things have felt stuck, if it felt like the work was being done but the results weren't showing up, it's not because something went wrong. It's because a paradox was being overlooked. And that's what this message is about. There are 3 core paradoxes that seem like contradictions, but they are actually the keys to making this real. Not surface-level real, not temporary shifts, but a total inner movement that causes the outer to reorganize in ways that no logic could predict. These aren't just ideas, they're doorways to freedom. And once they're understood, everything changes. Because the truth is, it was never about manifesting the thing. It was always about becoming the one who never needed to chase it in the first place. This is one of those truths that's so subtle, it slips past unnoticed, because it sounds innocent to say I want this or I really desire that. And at first glance, there's nothing wrong with wanting something better. But when Neville said that to desire a state is to have it, he wasn't just being poetic. He was pointing to the fact that real desire, spiritual desire, is not meant to be clung to or idolized, but fulfilled within. The moment a desire is born, the version of reality where it is already true exists. The only question is whether there's a willingness to step into that state and leave behind the one that still calls it a dream. Wanting becomes a trap the second it becomes the dominant state. When the desire turns into craving, needing, and checking for results, it actually reinforces the feeling that the thing is separate, somewhere far off, not here yet. That's why people stay in loops for months, even years, not because they aren't visualizing enough, but because they're still energetically anchored in not yet. The wish remains on a pedestal, and the identity remains small, waiting, and not enough. It's subtle, but every time something is desperately wanted, it gets pushed further away by the very act of reaching for it. Neville never said to kill desire. In fact, he said desire is a gift from God. But he also said that the only way to fulfill it is to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not as a fantasy, not as wishful thinking, but as a shift in identity. A deep knowing that says, this is who I am now. It's not about convincing the mind through logic or repetition. And it's not about ignoring the desire. It's about feeling its completion, living in the inner reality where it has already been answered, and letting that new state become natural. But this is where it gets paradoxical, because the more someone wants the manifestation, the harder it is to relax into the state where it's already done. The mind keeps looping back to how long will it take? What if it doesn't happen? What else should I be doing? And every one of those thoughts comes from the state of not having. And as long as that's the state being occupied, the world reflects it, not to punish, but to mirror. So the key isn't to push the desire away or pretend it doesn't matter. It's to feel it and then surrender to the end, to go to the place within where it's already true, not because of external evidence, but because the inner authority has spoken, because the decision has been made that this is now the identity, the reality, the state being lived from. And once that becomes natural, There's no longer a question of when will it happen, because it already did, within. That's where the real manifestation occurs. The outer just follows. This is why Neville talked about imagining until the state felt real and then letting it go. Not letting go of the desire, but letting go of the old self who didn't have it. Letting go of the old state, the old inner reactions, the habit of waiting. It's not about suppression. It's about moving. So the paradox is simple but powerful. The more the thing is wanted from a state of separation, the more that very wanting becomes the block. The shift happens when the wanting is transmuted into being, when the mind stops reaching and the heart rests in knowing. That's where the state of the wish fulfilled begins to feel like home. And from there, everything changes, not because the world was forced to shift, but because the self finally stepped into the version where it never needed to be chased in the first place. There's another idea floating around that in order to manifest, there needs to be some kind of performance on the outside. That if everything is acted out just right, like a role in a play, then the universe will get the hint and deliver what's being asked for. But this is where most get tripped up. Because while it might sound harmless to say act as if, that phrase gets misinterpreted so often that it ends up turning the whole process into a shallow performance instead of a real inner shift. Neville Goddard never said to fake anything on the outside. He said to move inward, to dwell in the state of the wish fulfilled, and let the outer world catch up naturally, automatically, and effortlessly. And this is where the paradox lies. Because the world teaches performance. Put on a smile, speak a certain way, do the right thing, and eventually something good will happen. But manifestation isn't about playing a part to convince the world. It's about finding the real self within, the one who already knows, already feels, already lives from the end. The self that doesn't need to prove or show or act like anything is happening, because within, it already has. The state creates the world, not the other way around. That's why Neville always emphasized the law of assumption, not the law of performance. What's assumed to be true within, deeply and consistently, shows up without. But when someone tries to walk around pretending, putting on a show in hopes that it'll speed things up, they're still rooted in the idea that the outside is in charge. That if the right lines are said or the right behavior is mimicked, then the desire will show up. But that's not how it works. It never was. Neville taught that imagination creates reality. But that doesn't mean forcing a smile or faking confidence. It means turning within and feeling the naturalness of the wish fulfilled. It means closing the eyes, silencing the outside noise, and stepping into the version of self that already has everything it once hoped for. And doing that again and again until that state becomes more real than the current facts. But again, here's the paradox. The 3D may not change right away, and that's where the real challenge comes. Because the mind wants proof. It wants instant feedback. But the law doesn't work through pressure, it works through persistence, through faith in the unseen, through the quiet but powerful knowing that what's being lived inside will eventually be echoed outside. Not because it was faked, but because it was fully embodied. The question isn't, what do I need to do out there to prove I have it? The real question is, am I truly dwelling in the state where this is already true? Not visiting that state for a moment and then snapping back into waiting, but living there, resting there, reacting from there. Because that's when the outer starts to reorganize. That's when the world starts to bend. Not because it's being manipulated, but because it no longer has a choice. It's simply reflecting the dominant inner state. So it's not about pretending. It's not about faking conversations, or changing tone, or buying props to play the role. It's about the inner state being so stable, so familiar, so real, that the outer world begins to mold itself around it. And when that happens, it doesn't feel like a surprise. It feels normal, natural, inevitable, because the real shift already happened. Not on the stage of life, but behind the curtain, in the only place that ever truly mattered, within. The third paradox. This is probably the paradox that breaks the brain the most, because for so long, the idea of needing something, whether it's love, success, money, clarity, or closure, feels like it's the very fuel that drives the manifestation. It's easy to believe that wanting something so deeply, needing it so badly, somehow speeds it up. That if enough energy, obsession, or longing is poured into it, eventually it has to arrive. But that's not what happens. In fact, the opposite usually shows up. And not because the desire is wrong, but because the state of needing it blocks the flow of receiving it. Neville didn't teach to suppress the desire. He didn't say, don't care about anything. But he made it clear that the state that manifests is not the state of craving, it's the state of being. There's a huge difference between imagining from the end and trying to force the end to happen. When there's a deep need, an emotional tightness, a constant obsession, it signals the subconscious that something is missing, and the law, being impersonal, simply reflects that back. Because the feeling of needing something desperately always says, I don't have it, and that's the state being lived from, no matter how often it's visualized or affirmed. This is why Neville taught the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not the feeling of waiting, hoping, or chasing. When the inner world shifts into, it's done, it's mine, I am this now, there's a peace that shows up. A stillness, a quiet confidence that doesn't need to monitor or check. And it's in that moment, that sacred, almost silent moment when the desire has been absorbed so fully that it's no longer seen as outside of self. That's when the shift happens. And here's what makes it all so wild. The second the need dissolves, the second the inner grip is released, the second the mind no longer says, "I'll only feel whole once this arrives," the space opens up. The state shifts. The identity relaxes into fulfillment. And ironically, or maybe perfectly, that's when the thing shows up. Not because it's being summoned through force, but because it's no longer being resisted through need. There's nothing clogging the flow anymore. It's like trying to fill a cup that's already clenched tight in a fist. The water can't get in. Not because it's not available, but because the cup is closed. But when the grip loosens, when there's a letting go of trying to make it happen, the cup opens. And then it fills. Not slowly, not conditionally, but effortlessly. Because the flow was always there. The only thing that ever blocked it was the inner signal that said, "I need this to be okay." So the paradox is this: the more something is needed to feel whole, the more the wholeness is denied. But the second the inner shift happens, the moment fulfillment is claimed now, before the facts, without negotiation, that's when the outer world starts to change. Not as a reward, but as a mirror. This is what makes manifestation feel magical when it finally clicks. Because the moment it's no longer being chased, it comes. The moment it's no longer needed to feel safe, it appears. And not because it was finally earned, but because the true self finally stopped denying it. It's not about giving up on the desire. It's about giving up on the version of self that needs it to feel enough. When that self fades, even for a moment, the reality that matches wholeness has no choice but to enter. And that's not magic. That's law. When these three paradoxes are seen as separate truths, they might feel confusing or even frustrating. But when they're understood together, they reveal a much deeper picture, one that points to the real essence of manifestation and, more importantly, to the true nature of fulfillment. The first paradox teaches that wanting too much from a place of lack only keeps the desire out of reach. The second shows that pretending on the outside won't change what's inside. It's the inner state that forms the reality, not the other way around. And the third tells us that needing something so badly actually blocks its arrival. But when that need fades, the flow opens. Put simply, all three are guiding toward one central idea. Fulfillment doesn't come from chasing or forcing external things. It comes from shifting who you are on the inside. It's about becoming the version of yourself who already has what you desire. Not just imagining it as a future possibility, but living it as a present reality. This means that manifestation isn't a struggle or a task to check off. It's a transformation of identity. It's realizing that what's sought outside has always been waiting to be accepted within. And as that acceptance grows, the outer world rearranges itself to match that new inner truth. Understanding this takes the pressure off. It turns manifestation from a game of trying harder into an invitation to rest in what's already true. The paradoxes aren't obstacles. They are signposts showing that the real work is done quietly, beneath the surface, in the realm of feeling and belief. When this clicks, it shifts everything. Manifestation stops being about pushing or forcing and becomes about surrendering and embodying. It's a reminder that the key to what's desired is not out there somewhere. It's already inside, waiting to be known. What part of these paradoxes challenged your old beliefs the most? Share your thoughts below. Let's start a conversation about how shifting inside first changes everything.